I found this information that I think is really important to know. It's about a concept. I don't know if his is his idea, but it's cognitive warfare by Francois Ducluzel. June to November 2020. Innovation Hub, January 2021. Executive Summary. Page 4. Introduction. Page 5. The Advent of Cognitive Warfare. Page 6. From Information Warfare to Cognitive Warfare. Page 6. Hacking the Individual. 7. Trust is the target. 8. Cognitive Warfare, a participatory propaganda. 8. Behavioral economy. Cyber psychology. The centrality of the human brain. Page 12. Understanding of the brain is a key challenge for the future. Page 12. The vulnerabilities of human brain. The role of emotions. Page 15. The battle for attention. Page 15. Long-term impacts of technology on the brain. Page 16. The promise of neurosciences. Page 17. The militarization of brain science. Page 18. Progress and viability of neuroscience and technology. NeuroSD. I don't know what does that mean. Page 18. Military and intelligence use of NeuroSD. Page 19. Direct weaponization of NeuroSD. Page 20. Neurodata. Page 21. Neurobioeconomy. Page 23. Towards a new operational domain. Russian and Chinese cognitive warfare definition. Page 26. It's about humans. Page 28. Recommendations. For NATO. Page 32. Impact on warfare development. 34. Conclusions 36. Bibliography and sources 37. Annex 38. Nation state case study. The weaponization of neuroscience in China. Annex 2. Nation states case study. The Russian National Technology Initiative 41. Page 41. Innovation Hub, January 2021. As written in the Warfighting 2040 paper, the nature of warfare has changed. The majority of current conflicts remain below the threshold of the traditionally accepted definition of warfare, but new forms of warfare have emerged, such as a cognitive warfare, while the human mind is now being considered as a new domain of war. With the increasing role of technology and information overload, individual cognitive abilities will no longer be sufficient to ensure an informed and timely decision making, leading to the new concept of cognitive warfare, which has become a recurring term in military terminology in recent years. Cognitive warfare causes an insidious challenge. It disrupts the ordinary understanding and reaction to events in a gradual and subtle way, but with significant harmful effects over time. Cognitive warfare has universal reach from the individuals to the state and multinational organizations. It feeds on the techniques of disinformation and propaganda aimed to psychologically exhausting the receptors of information. Everyone contributes to it, to varying degrees, consciously or subconsciously, and it provides invaluable knowledge on society, especially open societies such as those in the West. This knowledge can then be easily weaponized. It offers NATO's adversaries a means of bypassing the traditional battlefield with significant strategic results, which may be utilized to radically transform Western societies. The instruments of information warfare, along with the addition of neuro weapons, adds to the future technological perspectives, suggesting that the cognitive field will be one of tomorrow's battlefields. This perspective is further strengthened by the rapid advances of MBICs, nanotechnology, biotechnology, information technology, and cognitive science, and the understanding of the brain. NATO's adversaries are already investing heavily in these new technologies. NATO needs to anticipate advances in these technologies by raising the awareness on the true potential of cognitive warfare. Whatever the nature of object of warfare, it always comes down to a clash of human wills, and therefore what defines victory will be the ability to impose a desired behavior on a chosen audience. Actions undertaken in the five domains air, land, sea, space, and cyber are all executed, and in order to have an effect on the human domain, it is therefore time for NATO to recognize the renewed importance of the sixth operational domain, namely the human domain. Cognitive warfare. Introduction. Individual and organizational cognitive capabilities will be of paramount importance because of the speed and volume of information available in the modern battle space. If modern technologies holds the promise of improving human cognitive performance, it is also holds the seeds of serious threats for military organizations. Because organizations are made up of human beings, human limitations and preferences ultimately affect organizational behavior and decision making processes. Military organizations are subject to the problem of limited rationality, but this constraint is often overlooked in practice. In an environment permeated with technology and overloaded with information, managing the cognitive abilities with military organization will be key while developing capabilities to harm the cognitive abilities of opponents will be a necessity. In other words, NATO will need to get the ability to safeguard her decisions making process and disrupt the adversary's one. The study intends to respond to three following questions: improve awareness on cognitive warfare, including a better understanding of the risks and opportunities of new cognitive human mind technologies, provide out of the box insights on cognitive warfare, and to provide strategic, strategic level arguments to SACT as recommends or not cognitive human minds as an operational domain. Now we are again. SACT is Supreme Allied Commander Transformation, one of the NATO's two strategic commanders and the commanding officer of Allied Command Transformation located in Norfolk, Virginia. The advent of cognitive warfare, from information warfare to cognitive warfare. Information warfare is the most related and thus the most easily conflated type of warfare with regards to cognitive warfare. However, there are key distinctions that make cognitive warfare unique enough to be addressed under its own jurisdiction. As a concept, IW or information warfare was first coined and developed under US military doctrine, and has subsequently been adopted in different forms by several nations. As former US Navy Commander Stuart Green described it as information operations, the closest existing American doctrinal concept of for cognitive warfare consists of five core capabilities or elements. These include electronic warfare, computer network operations, side ops, military deception, and operational security. Succinctly, succinctly, information warfare aims at controlling the flow of information. Information warfare has been designed primarily to support objectives defined by the traditional mission of military organizations. Subsequently, information warfare aims at controlling the flow of information. Information warfare has been designed primarily to support objectives defined by the traditional mission of military organizations, namely to produce lethal kinetic effects on the battlefield. It was not designed to achieve lasting political successes. As defined by Clint Watts, cognitive warfare opposes the capacities to know and to produce. It actively thwarts knowledge. Cognitive sciences cover all the sciences that concern knowledge and its processes. Between parentheses, psychology, linguistics, neurobiology, logic, and more. Cognitive warfare degrades the capacity to know, produce or thwart knowledge. Cognitive sciences cover all the science that concerns knowledge and its processes. Psychology, linguistics, neurobiology, logic, and more. Oh, what the hell?
Conflicts will increasingly depend on and revolve around information and communications. Indeed, both cyber war and net war are modes of conflict that are largely about knowledge, about who knows what, when, where, and why, and about how secure a society. John Arkell and David Rumfeld. The Advent of the Network, Rand, 1996. Big data allow us to develop fabulous calculation analysis performances, but what makes it possible to respond to a situation is reason, and reason is what enables to take a decision in what is not calculable. Otherwise, we only confirm the state of affairs. Cognitive warfare is therefore the way of using knowledge for conflicting purpose. In its broadest sense, cognitive warfare is not limited to the military or institutional world. Since the early 1990s, this capability has tended to be applied to the political, economic, cultural, and societal fields. Any user of modern information technology is a potential target. It targets the whole of a nation's human capital. The most striking shift of this practice from the military to the civilian world is the pervasiveness of CW, the cyber war activities across everyday life that sit outside the normal peace crisis conflict constructs with harmful effects. as well as the potential execution of cognitive war to complement to a military conflict. It can also be conducted alone without any link to an engagement of the armed forces. Moreover, cognitive warfare is potentially endless, since there can be no peace treaty or surrender for this type of conflict. Evidence now exists that shows new CW tools and techniques charged military personnel directly, not only with classical information weapons, but also with a constantly growing and rapidly evolving arsenal of neuro weapons targeting the brain. And it's important to recognize various nations dedicate their endeavors to develop non kinetic operations that target the human with effects at every level, from individual level up to the socio-political level. Hacking the individual. The revolution in information technology has enabled cognitive manipulations of a new kind, of an unprecedented and highly elaborated scale. All this happens at much lower cost than in the past, when it was necessary to create effects and impact through a non-virtual actions in the physical realm. Thus, in a continuous process, classical military capabilities do not counter cognitive warfare, despite the military having difficulty in recognizing the reality and effectiveness of the phenomena associated with cognitive warfare. The relevance of kinetic and resource intensive means of warfare is no less diminishing. Social engineering always starts with a deep dive into the human environment of the target. The goal is to understand the psychology of the targeted people. This phase is more important than any other, as it allows not only the precise targeting of the right people, but also to anticipate reactions and to develop empathy. Understanding the human environment is the key to building the true trust that will ultimately lead to the desired results. Humans are an easy target since they all contribute by providing information on themselves, making the adversaries' sock puppets more powerful. In any case, NATO's adversaries focus on identifying the alliance's centers of gravity and vulnerabilities. They have long identified that the main vulnerability is the human. It is easy to find these centers of gravity in open societies because they are reflected in the study of human and social sciences, such as political science, history, geography, biology, philosophy, voting system, public administration, international politics, international relations, religious studies, education, sociology, arts and culture, etc. Cognitive warfare Cognitive warfare is a war of ideologies that strives to erode the trust that underpins every society. Trust, trust is the target. Cognitive warfare pursues the objective of undermining trust. Between parentheses, public trust in electoral processes, trust in institutions, allies, politicians. Therefore, the individual becomes the weapon, while the goal is not to attack what individuals think, but rather the way they think. It has the potential to unravel the entire societal contract that underpins societies. It is natural to trust the senses. It is natural to trust the senses, to believe what is seen and read, but democratization of automated tools, but on democratization of automated tools, using AI, artificial intelligence, no longer requiring a technological background, and enables what technological background. Um, Behavioral economy, where I'm where I was. Trust is the target. The most striking shift of this practice from the military to the civilian world, pervasiveness. Trust is the target. Cognitive warfare pursues the objective of undermining trust, public trust in electoral processes, trust in institutions, allies, politicians. Therefore, the individual becomes the weapon, while the goal is not to attack what the individual thinks, but rather the way they think. It has the potential to unravel the entire social contract that underpins societies. It is natural to trust the senses, to believe what is seen and read, but the democratization of automated tools and techniques using AI, no longer requiring artificial intelligence, no longer requiring a technological background, enables anyone to distort information and to further undermine trust in open societies. The use of fake news, deepfakes, Trojan horses, and individual avatars will create new suspicions which anyone can exploit. It is easier and cheaper for adversaries to undermine trust in our own systems than to attack our power grids, factories, or military compounds. Hence, it is likely that in the near future there will be more attacks from a growing and much more diverse number of potential players with a greater risk for escalation and miscalculation. The characteristics of cyberspace, between parentheses lack of regulation, difficulties, and associated risk of attribution of attacks in particular, mean that new actors, either state or non-state, are to be expected. TAs, the example of COVID-19, TAs. What's that TAs?
So I think that was a mistake, and the correct way to say this is, as the example of COVID-19 shows, the massive amount of text on the subject, including deliberately biased text. Example is the Lancet study on chloroquine, created an information and knowledge overload, which in turn generates both a loss of credibility and a need for closure. Therefore, the ability for humans to question normally any data information presented is hampered with a tendency to fall back on a bias to the detriment of unfettered decision making. It applies to trust among individuals as well as groups, political alliances, and societies. Trust, in particular among allies, is a targeted vulnerability. As any international institution does, NATO relies on trust between its partners. Trust is biased not only on respecting some explicit and tangible agreements, but also on invisible contracts, on sharing values, which is not easy when such a proportion of allied nations have been fighting each other for centuries. This has left wounds. This has left wounds and scars, creating a cognitive slash information landscape that our adversaries study with great care. Their objective is to identify the cognitive centers of gravity of the alliance, which they will target with info weapons. Cognitive warfare, participatory propaganda. In many ways, cognitive warfare can be compared to propaganda,
which can be defined as quote unquote a set of methods employed by an organized group that wants to bring about the active or passive participation in its actions of a mass of individuals, psychologically unified through psychological manipulations and incorporated in an organization. The pursuit of propaganda is not to program minds but to influence attitudes and behaviors by getting people to adopt the right attitude, which may consist of doing certain things or often stopping doing them. Cognitive warfare is a is cognitive warfare is methodically exploited as a component of a global strategy by adversaries aimed at weakening, interfering, and destabilizing targeted populations, institutions, and states in order to influence their choices, to undermine autonomy or their decisions and the sovereignty of their institutions. Such campaigns combine both real and distorted information, misinformation, between parentheses, exaggerated facts, and fabricated news. This information. New tools and techniques combined with the changing technological and information foundations of modern societies are creating an unprecedented capacity to conduct virtual societal warfare. Modern propaganda is based on scientific analysis of psychology and sociology. Step by step, the propagandist builds his techniques on the basis of his knowledge of man, his tendencies, his desires, his needs, his psychic mechanisms, his conditions, and as much as on social psychology as on depth of psychology. In many ways, cognitive warfare can be compared to propaganda, which can be defined as a set of methods employed by an organized group that wants to bring about the active or passive participation in its actions of a mass of individuals, psychologically unified through psychological manipulations and incorporated in an organization. The purpose of propaganda is not to program minds but to influence attitudes and behaviors by getting people to adopt the right attitude, which may consist of doing certain things or often stopping doing them. Cognitive warfare is cognitive warfare is methodically cognitive warfare is methodically exploited as a component of a global strategy by adversaries aimed at weakening, interfering, and destabilizing targeted populations, institutions, and states in order to influence their choices, to undermine the autonomy of their decisions and the sovereignty of their institutions. Such campaigns combine both real and distorted information, misinformation, exaggerated facts, and fabricated news. Disinformation. This information preys on the cognitive vulnerabilities of its targets by taking advantage of pre-existing anxieties or beliefs that predispose them to accept false information. This requires the aggressor to have an acute understanding of the socio-political dynamics of the play and to know exactly when and how to penetrate to best exploit these vulnerabilities. In this square, modern propaganda is based on scientific analysis of psychology and sociology. Step by step, the propagandist builds his techniques on the basis of his knowledge of man, his tendencies, his desires, his needs, his psych mechanisms, his conditions and much on social psychology as on-depth psychology. Cognitive warfare exploits the innate vulnerabilities of the human mind because of the way it is designed to process information, which have always been exploited in warfare, of course. However, due to the speed of per- pervasiveness, pervasiveness, per, 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 pervasiveness of technology and information, the human mind is no longer able to process the flow of information. Where cognitive warfare differs from propaganda is in the fact that everyone participates, mostly inadvertently, to information processing and knowledge formation in an unprecedented way. This is a subtle but significant change. While, while individuals were passively submitted to propaganda, they now actively contribute to it. The exploitation of human cognition has become a massive industry, and it is expected that emerging artificial intelligence tools will soon provide propagandists radically enhanced, enhanced capabilities to manipulate humans' minds and change human behaviors. Enhanced behavioral economy. Capitalism is undergoing a radical mutation. What many describe as the data economy is in fact better understood as a behavioral economics. Behavioral economics (BE) is defined as a method of economic analysis that applies psychological insights into human behavior to explain economic decision making. Slash. This is not a slash. Decision making as research into decision making shows, behaviors becomes increasingly computational. BE is at the crossroads between hard science and soft science. Operationally, this means massive and methodological use of behavioral data and the development of methods to aggressively seek out new data sources with the vast amount of between parentheses behavioral data that everyone generates mostly without our consent or an awareness. Further manipulation is easily achievable. The large digital economic companies have developed new data capture methods, allowing the inference of personal information that users might not necessarily intend to disclose. The excess data has become the basis for new predictions markets called targeted advertising. Here is the origin of surveillance capitalism in an unprecedented and lucrative view behavioral surplus. Behavioral surplus data science, material infrastructure, computational power, algorithmic systems, and automated platforms, claims Sosha Zuboff. In democratic societies, advertising has quickly become as important as research. It has finally become the cornerstone of a new type of business that depends on large scales only monitoring. The target is the human being in the broadest sense, and it is easy to divert the data obtained from just commercial purposes, as the Cambridge Analytica CA scandal demonstrated. Thus, the lack of regulation of the digital space, the so called data swamp, does not only benefit the digital age regimes, which can exert remarkable control. Esa está en 2000. Sí, aparte de el bra. El bra viene 5 por 900, que son estos, pero la pura faja es como esta, mira. Sí, en 2000. Que esa es de la Ancherry, que es de las mejores, es colombiana, que es de lo mejor que hay.